Well, that was a thing. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the pre-show, which has been going on for quite some time. You've just not seen it. We're a little behind in our schedule today. We'll be getting ahead of ourselves or catching up with ourselves in just a moment. We're going to start late. And we might as well. If you're watching this in the replay, you can just really not fast forward at all. We'll start this thing right now. Oh, see, I can hear me. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the pre-show, which has been going on for quite some time. Let's turn that off, shall we? Okay. And I am going to start this thing, I think. This has been, this will be a great story for afterwards. How do you troubleshoot streaming media, blah, 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 blah. As soon as I figure out what screen I'm supposed to be on, we will do this. Let's start my quiz real quick, so that'll be going. Okay. Can I do something? All right. Let's do a thing here. There's a lot of buttons to press now. Okay. All right. Let's do this. Let's do this and see what happens, shall we? I have to push the record button. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the January edition of 2015 of Professor Messer's Live Network Plus Study Group, the study group that almost didn't happen. It's quite an interesting story there. For those of you attending live or starting about 10 minutes late, I apologize to everyone who got my tweets and said, hey, we're live right now. No, we weren't. Where were we? But we finally made it here. And we're so glad that you could make it here with us. I see everyone in the chat room. If you'd like to join us in the chat room, that's where I see all the questions come in and keep track of things going on. You can join us at ProfessorMesser.com on any page. If you'd like to watch the live stream, it's ProfessorMesser.com/live, and there's a chat on every page. So I'll see the chat wherever it happens to be. I assure you, I will find it there. I want to thank everyone for joining us. It has been a fantastic start to the new year. Your support has been phenomenal, not only in your watching the live videos that are out on YouTube, but also purchasing the offline version of my course. These offline purchases also go towards helping us keep everything going here. We really appreciate it. If you want to know more about how you could take these videos that you watch online and take them offline in a downloadable version, you can visit ProfessorMesser.com/GetNetPlus. And if you'd like to see what we're doing here all the time, you can watch things going on Twitter, on YouTube. And of course, if you want 10% off any of your CompTIA vouchers, go to ProfessorMesser.com/vouchers. We'll do that as well. There's a nice thing that we do during this study group is we do live Q&A. I ask questions of you and you answer them, and I see your answer online, and we all get to answer together. It's like Trivia Crack, except you can play as much as you'd like. This is one of those that also has no in-app purchases. So you got to love that part of it. So this is where you can find this. It's at Socrative.com. This is something you can pop open a new browser window and go to Socrative.com and click the student login section. If you have a mobile device you'd like to do this from, absolutely free app. There's no in-app purchases or anything else like that. You can find that on your iOS App Store. You can find it on Google Play for your Android folks, and you can find it on the Windows Store for the two of you that have one of those Windows phones, although they're becoming a lot more popular. I'm seeing more of them out in the wild. And I'm always curious. I want to walk up to somebody. How's that working for you? Because it looks pretty nice. So we'll see what comes of that. Now, once you get into Socrative, you will see a question is already waiting for you. I've already started things up. You're already there. And the question for you is, how long have you been studying for your Network Plus certification? Go to Socrative.com, log into the student login, and go to the room Professor Messer, all one word. Notice it's Professor Messer. Well, you have to spell it right. But once you get there, you will see a question. Looks a lot like this. It does not look like me. It looks like this. There we go. It has less than 3 months, 3 to 6 months, 6 to 9, 9 to year, over a year, or maybe you already have your Network Plus certification. You can see that there as well. It is when you're working with this where you start putting in the questions, the answers, you will see, I will provide you with a view into what people have answered. So we get to see how many people answered which particular question. And this is live on my side. You'll notice you can see this moving. As people are answering, I'll be able to tell what they're answering. And this is kind of normal for our Network Plus study group about this time of the year. A lot of people have just started their classes for the semester. They've just started some Network Plus certifications. Maybe it's the beginning of the year and you've set a goal for yourself that said, I'm going to get my Network Plus certification. And so we have 58% of you less than 3 months studying. And interestingly enough, way on the other side, 12% of you already have your Network Plus certification. So this is one of those where you might even be able to get a continuing education unit just by watching this today. And I'll give you a secret code as we go through this today that you can email to me. For those of you that did this last week, I still have a number of those to get out, but I will get an email back to you with a digital certificate that says, yes, you did indeed watch this. So listen in this first hour for that special code that you can then go to the Contact Us link at the top of my website and send it back to me. The Network Plus certification, for those of you that have kind of been following along with what CompTIA has done, was released December the 1st, 2011, so over 3 years ago. So for all of these emails, I get many emails throughout the month asking, hey, is this going to be updated at some point? Your videos are like 3 years old. Yes, they are, because I created them when the specifications, the exam objectives were released, and we usually expect an update every 3 years. Now, CompTIA has not announced anything. Other CompTIA partners have certainly said we have our next edition of the Network Plus ready to go. In fact, if you do some crafty searching, if you're very, very good with Google, you could perhaps run across the next set of exam objectives. And that's something you're really going to have to work on, because I found them. I'm not a CompTIA partner. I don't have any special relationship with CompTIA, but apparently they have had them out on their website somewhere. And the magic of Google has found them. This means, of course, that the Network Plus certification is probably going to be updated very shortly. But if you're already studying, don't worry about it, because there's a number of things that work in your favor. First, CompTIA will extend out and have an overlap period of when you can take this exam or the new exam. So you've got, usually they do about 6 months. In some cases, they've done 9 months. That was an unusual case, I think, but they try to keep it somewhere around 6 months so that you can, if you're already studying and getting into it, you got 6 months of a ramp that you could take this. And whether you pass the N10005, which is the existing version, or you pass whatever the new version is going to be, you still get exactly the same certification. It's exactly the same. The certification doesn't have on it which version of the exam you took. All that's important is that you passed it. And of course, that you have a 3-year time frame where you have to keep everything updated. So it would be very unusual for somebody to say, I need you to take the N100, whatever the next one is, not the 005. I won't accept that as a certification, which is a little short-sighted, because quite honestly, the differences between those are relatively incremental. There's no huge changes in the next edition of the exam. So this N10006 will be the next version. It is going to be an update to the existing exam. So if you did want to jump ahead and take that N10006 after studying for the N10005, you only have to incrementally update the things that are new on the exam. And when that comes out, I'll probably provide you with more information about that. Well, let's get some questions answered as we're going through this, shall we? I have a lot of questions to ask today. Let me see if I can get things set up on my side to go to the next question. Here we go. All right. First question that I have for you, since we're all about networking in the Network Plus, this one certainly is I would guess, a fundamental network question, which is, which of these would be an example of an EUI-48 address? And I have to pick 2 of them from this list. That means there must be 2 of them in here that are somewhat accurate from that perspective. Let's see what our options are. And again, no answering this in the chat room. This is one where everybody has to figure this out on their own. So don't spoil it for anyone else. And here are the options. I'm not going to read all of these off. We can certainly see them, but two of these are in EUI 48. So again, one of the things I like to do with these questions is give you something that requires you to know what that means. So you have to be able to look at EUI 48 and know what it is. And if you know what that is, it should be relatively straightforward when you start looking at these particular addresses that are up here, what the differences might be between them or the similarities might be between them. So we are going to really look at EUI 48 and see what those differences are as we go through this. There are certainly places you can go on your computer to see this as well. For those of you that want to answer this and join along with everyone else, I'm going to have you go to the Socrative website, socrative.com, and look at those pieces as well. This is one where when I start looking at working with these, I'm going to bring up some details on my side. When I start working with these kinds of addresses, there's a lot. There's IP addresses. There's EUI 48. There are MAC addresses. There are all kinds of different, especially when you get into IPv6, there's different kinds of addresses. And this is where I start to have to take a pause. I have to take a step back and I have to count. So here's your hint for this one, is going through and counting. And if you count, I think you'll be okay with this one. I'm going to see what I have on this side. Again, here's the questions that you might have available for you. I'm going to see if I have some of these on my side that I can show. I'm going to wait for a couple more people to do this as well and get those out of those pieces. I'm going to also type a few things on my side. Starting late, I wasn't able to get things going. You'll notice also there's a call-in line for the show. I opened the call-in lines about an hour into the show. If you're watching this on the replay, you will also have an option to call in and leave a message. So if there's a question you really want to look at, you can do that as well. All right, well, I've got some EUI 48 addresses on my computer. Before we look and see what was the answer with this one, I'm going to bring up and have a look at this. EUI 48 is another term for what we generally think of as a traditional Ethernet MAC address. So you can look through this list and try to get a feel for what a MAC address might be. If you look and do the 48 part is the number of bits. That's 6 bytes if you look at it in hexadecimal. So it's 6 groupings. And if we look at my computer, the physical address right there at the top is an EUI 48 address. So if you start looking at the EUI 48 options that we had up, we have a number of these here. We're looking for a group of 6 effectively. So you can see that these have some differences in how the numbers and letters in this hexadecimal address are separated. Each byte of this is separated out by either colons or a dash sign. Some of them have the name of a manufacturer in the address. The first 3 bytes of a MAC address, for instance, are the manufacturer's name. Some have but you separate them out in this way. In fact, sometimes you don't see any separation at all. They're all stuck together, just one big address. Sometimes they're grouped into 4s. It depends on what you're looking at, what these are. So don't worry so much about the delimiters and how the bytes are separated out. We're looking for 6 of these. So one of the things we have to know is right here at the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There you go. That's an EUI 48 address. In fact, I think I might have taken exactly the same address as I have in my notes. In my I have the slide here. Let me just bring this over. Here's the slide. If you were to watch the video for EUI 48, it is exactly that address that I have right there on the screen. So yes, indeed. In fact, you'll notice that those first 3 bytes we replaced the manufacturer's name is also EUI 48. So if we go to the results page, I will bring this up on my computer so we can see this. We really had quite a mix. Everybody did a little bit of everything on this one, but we know that the A was one of the correct answers. I wonder if I can make this a little bit bigger. Not much. Here we go. So we know that A was another one, and we knew that the del was another one. Now let's see if B, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 grouping, 7 bytes in the hexadecimal. So it's not going to be B. And we know we certainly have a lot more bytes down here in D. That looks like an IPv6 address. That is not an EUI-48. And on E, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, too many bytes there. So if you chose A and you chose C, that would be the correct answer. So good job at finding the EUI-48 for those. This is one of those questions that they're really good at asking you on the Network Plus exam. I think a lot of people get a little overwhelmed over all of the acronyms, all of the addresses that you have to know. There's IPv4, there's MAC, there's IPv6, there's wiring diagrams and understanding the crossover cables versus the straight through cables versus a rollover cable versus a loopback cable. And if you've never worked with these before, there's a lot to take in. So if you separate it out, get the exam objectives, you'll do a lot better with going through those. Let's move away from one of those very involved questions and see if we can go to something that's more fundamental with networking. Here's another question for you. Let's go through this one. I need to change this on my side so that you can see it. And there is the question, which is which of these could be used to easily configure trunks across a large number of switches? So you've got a lot going on with this particular question. We're really looking for a specific kind of technology, and the options available to you are VTP, NTP, SMTP, VoIP, HTTP. This may be one of those that's just trying to get rid of the things that you know are not the correct answer. That may be the way we go about working this one. If you've never worked with this technology before, again, it's one of those memorization things. We have to really be very familiar with the technologies and how they operate. So let's try to think about the things that it might not be. So we'll eliminate what we know is not something that we use to configure trunks, or maybe we don't know. So now's the time to really get into the details of understanding the acronyms that are thrown at you. And the Network Plus objectives have all in the last few pages of the objective sheets, just page after page after page of acronyms. So it's sometimes good to have flashcards or something of that sort to help you with those acronym pieces. The folks in the chat room, of course, are saying that last one was a lot. I kind of started off with one that was a real head scratcher. Maybe it's all downhill from here. I kind of like getting things wrong occasionally, though. If something's broken, it gives me a chance to fix it, or if it's wrong, it gives me a chance to understand why it was wrong. So if you get asked that on the exam, you'll be that much farther ahead of the game. So we've got a number of people that have answered this. If you'd like to answer this, you're just joining us, go out to Socrative.com, go to the student login, and there's no login specifically. You just put your name in and you choose the room name of Professor Messer, all one word. Okay, so I think in this case we bounced back pretty well. I think we did pretty well at getting back into the game here. We've got 66% of us that chose VTP, whatever that is. I have a feeling a lot of you knew that it wasn't the network time protocol, NTP, although 24% said, yeah, what's NTP? SMTP, of course, used for mail transfers. You've got a VoIP or VoIP, that's the voice over IP, like your Skype or telephone type communication. And HTTP is what we would use to pull in a web browser. That's not used at all to easily configure trunks across a large number of switches. So the real question then is, we chose VTP, 60% of us chose VTP, but what is it? And this is something that is sometimes used in switching. This is one of those things when you get into automation, especially automation of how trunks are configured on switches, you may not necessarily want to opt into this. You may indeed want to manually configure trunks, and trunks aren't usually something that changes a lot. We don't really have a lot of modifications that we're making to trunk configurations whenever we're working with switches. So generally it's not something automatic, but if you have an infrastructure where you have hundreds of switches and you don't want to have to log in to 100 switches to change one single setting on trunks that are going into that switch, it may make perfect sense to use something like the VLAN trunking protocol, or VTP. This is one where the manual configuration may or may not be an option. And although this is something that is proprietary to Cisco, this specific protocol and methodology is proprietary to Cisco, other switch manufacturers have similar ways to automate and manage switches, especially trunk configurations across those as well. You may also see when you're working with those switches something called MVRP, Multiple VLAN Registration Protocol. That's more of a standard. You may see it called that on those non-Cisco devices rather than that. And that's when you get into configuring these switches and having this information going back and forth. They're just static switches. With VTP, you configure everything in one place, and it pushes down that configuration to all of the other switches that are out there. It simply copies itself over to all of those other switches. Well, here's the thing then. If you start using that, it's so simple. Instead of going into each individual device, now I can just go one place and push it down. But there's the challenge, of course. What if you're typing along? It's been a long day. Maybe you're doing the changes, and change control requires you to do these things at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday. It's very tiring. You sit there and you say, yeah, just delete that trunk. And then every single switch deletes that trunk. And you realize, wait a second, I just brought down a trunk on our production network on everything. What was that? Let me rebuild it again. There's stories like this that you can read on Reddit very, very often with VTP, and how easily it is to completely obliterate a particular section of your network. So that's one of the advantages and disadvantages, is that it makes it so easy if you have a lot of switches out there, but it becomes a lot more of a challenge if you happen to make a mistake. So if you are using this, just be very careful with when you're hitting that enter key and make sure that you're not causing a problem there. Let's do another question. Again, no answering in the chat room. This question is, which of these best describe RIP v2? RIP v2. One of these is has got to be something that we run across occasionally. I've been using this technology for, gosh, RIP, not specifically RIP v2, but RIP been using for many years. Now that I think about it, I'm not happy about that all of a sudden. Let's see what options you might have, though. Is RIP v2 a distance vector routing protocol? Is it a static routing protocol? Is it a hybrid routing protocol, a large scale routing protocol, or a link state routing protocol? There's a very specific term that's associated with RIP v2, and this is one where we want to get in to understand more about how these dynamic routing protocols operate. And this name really does help us understand that piece and give us an idea about that. Again, you can go to Socrative.com and learn more about or find out where to answer this. You can answer along with us and go to the student login, go to the Professor Master Room. I think I set up RIP for the first time on a 56K WAN link connecting to Novell NetWare servers, version 2.15. So this goes way back. I don't think we had electricity back then. Now that I think about it, maybe we did. It's hard to remember. This is a routing protocol, and if you understand how RIP v2 works, it should be very obvious when you read through these names what is happening with RIP v2. So let's see how we did. We've got a number of questions that are coming in. Chat room is pondering this as they go through. 56% of you said distance vector routing protocol, but 24% of you said it's a link state routing protocol. And then we've got 10 or less than 10% said perhaps static routing protocol, hybrid routing protocol, large scale routing protocol. Well, I can tell you that RIP v2 or RIP in itself has been around for quite some time. We've had RIP running since the 80s on our network. RIP version 2 is a not relatively, but it was an updated version of that RIP protocol. We commonly see this used inside of our organizations. You're not using RIP to be able to send dynamic routing updates out to the internet or to other organizations. This is one where inside of your autonomous system, we call it your AS, anything within your realm of responsibility, this is what you might use to update routers inside of your network. But you would never use this to update routers that are located on somebody else's network. This is what we call a distance vector routing protocol, because the best path out of a router, if you're using RIP, is going to be based on the lowest number of hops. A hop is a router. So between one router and another is one hop. Every time we pass through a router, we're passing through that one hop. I guess it would be that method that we use to count. So if we have to hop through 3 routers to get to a site, but there's another way to get there that only takes 2 routers, we want to take the one with fewer hops. And that's the only thing that RIP really uses to determine which is the best route. Now, if you're thinking about this off the top of your head, you may think, but wait, what if the way that takes 2 hops is over a really slow link, but the 3 hops is over a high-speed network? Wouldn't it make sense to go the 3 hops? It would, but RIP version 2 doesn't take that speed or latency or anything else into account. It's only based on number of hops. It's a distance factor. The vector that it uses to determine where to go is based on the distance or the number of hops. This is a dynamic routing protocol. So this is one where you effectively tell your computer or you tell your router, please use RIP v2, go. You really don't have to give it a lot more information. It listens to other routers that are out there. It builds a routing table dynamically. If anything changes, if a link goes down on that router, it changes its routing table and sends those updates via RIP out to those other sites. Again, that dynamic aspect of this is something that happens automatically. And dynamic routing protocols like RIP and OSPF and BGP and EIGRP, those are fantastic. And they're very commonly used in people's networks. Even though it's automatic, it's so well honed and well defined, and you really can control it quite well that it's very common to use this. OSPF is great at determining, for instance, different routes. Sometimes OSPF can be configured for ECMP, equal cost multipaths. You could have multiple paths out to a site that are exactly the same, and it will load balance across them. Some of these routing protocols are very, very smart with the way that they operate. Now, if we start looking at the answers that we had there, we know that we're dealing with a distance vector protocol. So for those of you that answered A, you got this absolutely right. There is really no such thing as a static routing protocol. There is static routing where I tell the router, I'm going to type in, if you need to get to this route, go out this interface. If you need to get to this other route, go out this other interface. You're manually typing those things in. I mentioned earlier, some people don't like the dynamic aspect of these configurations, and they much prefer manually configuring these things in their routers and in their firewalls. And that's fine. It isn't a protocol, though, that's used to do this. It's simply static routing. It's not a dynamic updating piece of it. It's completely static. Hybrid routing protocol, RIP version 2, is not hybrid. There's a lot of questions as to what really means hybrid routing, and there's a specific set of definitions that you can tend to listen and consider when you're talking about that. But RIP version 2 does not fall into those argumentative categories of hybrid routing. A large-scale routing protocol is more of a generic term. Large-scale routing is something that you can do and create mesh networks. There's a number of generally proprietary protocols that handle something like that. I kind of made up that term, large-scale routing protocol. And link-state routing protocol, not exactly what we're talking about in this case either. So for those of you in the chat room that got that one right, some folks are saying, yes, I guessed, but I got it right. And ultimately, that's what really matters when you start working in your exam, is getting that one right. That is the one where you really have to think about this. I got a lot of OSI questions this month. I got a lot of OSI questions. I got some yesterday on Facebook. I got some in my email. I think constantly it seems that it's probably the first thing I think that a number of these classes that started in January go through is the OSI model and trying to get a feel for it. So I have a question for you about the OSI model, and it is specific to OSI layers generally associated with network switches. So in this case, I'm not really even giving you an option. You've just got to figure out which OSI layer it might be. We know there are 7 OSI layers. You have to figure it out. You have to figure out which one of these is going to be. Well, don't you wish you just had 4? Just give me 4 and I'll break it down from there. In this case, I'm going to ask you to figure out whether it's 7 through 1. It's got to be one of those. Whenever I get these questions about OSI, I think a lot of them come to me because the OSI model, it's a model. And some of the protocols that we think about work at different layers. I think, for instance, a question I got on Facebook this past week was somebody talking about SSL. and the SSL protocol, and they were reading one piece of information that said SSL was at layer 5. They were looking at some of my videos where I stuck SSL at layer 6. And I think even if you went to Wikipedia, it would tell you that it could even be layer 7, because SSL kind of sets up its operation at layer 5. It really operates at layer 6, but of course it's encrypting data at layer 7. So it kind of reaches into that. And we get into these conversations with OSI that sometimes are not very cut and dry. Now, with this particular question, I wanted to give you one that was very specific. It is a layer generally associated with network switches. So I tried to make it so you couldn't weasel out of this one. There's only one of these that really is going to be associated with network switches. As you might think, this is probably somewhere lower down in the stack, in that network stack of things. And that's why when we start looking at this, people will probably complain to me about what I chose for this one. But I assure you that the answer for the one generally associated with network switches can generally be one of these, although we can always fight about the other, and I'll talk about that in a moment. I chose this one. In fact, this very specific question I chose because it's a bit of a running gag in the chat room whenever it comes up. So here's how we voted on this one. Nobody said layer 7. Nobody said layer 4. A couple folks said layer 5 and 6. Very few people said layer 1, but look at the conversation happening here at layer 2, layer 3. 48% said layer 2, 40% said layer 3. Now, why would that have happened? What is it that caused that to happen? So here is the answer, the actual answer, and we'll fight about whether we'll take your answer or not. Layer 2 is what we call the data link layer. This is the layer that really deals with things going into and out of these communications between network interface cards that are packetized. They're stuck in a frame, really. If we want to talk Cisco terminology, it's a frame of information that happens at layer 2. And it is the MAC addresses going back and forth that we generally refer to as layer 2 addresses. We refer to those as MAC addresses as layer 2. This is one of those also, we start looking at it, where you see data link control protocols. And as we know, on Ethernet, the only way these devices know to talk to each other at the Ethernet layer is via MAC address. If a device doesn't know your MAC address, he can send a broadcast or a multicast, but he can't talk to you on a unicast because he has to know your MAC address to be able to communicate with you. This is what we call the switching layer, because switches make their determination of where traffic goes based on the MAC address of the destination. That's it. Switching is a layer 2 concept. Whenever you, especially for an exam, whenever you hear the concept of a switch, and just in that term, just in that context, a switch is something that operates at layer 2. A switch is something that makes its forwarding decisions based on the MAC address, and that's it. Now, when we start looking at how people answered, wait a second, Mr. Professor, I thought, and I have a switch that can route. It's a layer 3 switch. It has routing inside of it. Therefore, looking at your question, which clearly said generally associated with network switches can route, therefore layer 3. I win. There. All finished. Unfortunately, your exams probably won't be quite so good to you if you choose layer 3. Layer 3 is routing, layer 2 is switching. And even these terms that the marketing folks came up with called a layer 3 switch is really a switch which has inside of it a section of it that makes forwarding decisions based on MAC address, and a completely different section with completely different logic, and in some cases completely different hardware, that makes its forwarding decision based on a layer 3 or an IP address. In fact, generally, you may not even turn that piece of it on. In fact, a switch, doing everything at layer 2 is still a switch. Anytime you start doing anything where you're making a forwarding decision at layer 3, that is a router. That is doing routing. Even though we may not call it a router, even though the marketing people call it a layer 3 switch, that section of the switch is routing. This section of the switch is switching. So if you're ever looking at an exam and they're asking a question about switches, or they're asking you about switching, it's layer 2, it's MAC addresses. If they're talking to you about routing, or they're talking to you about layer 3 switching, they're really talking about routing. Think about IP addresses or a layer 3 address with that. So that can be a little odd in the way that we talk about these things in our industry. And I completely understand. If you answered layer 3 here, we call switches sometimes layer 3 devices. And I get emails to me all the time that people are adamant. They say, no, no, no. A switch is a layer 3 device, even uses the same software and the same hardware. It's in the same box. Therefore, it's layer 3. But when you're talking about certification exams and trying to get an understanding of what you know, they're going to ask you switch, they're going to ask you router. So keep that in mind. And that's now in the chat room. I've already got things going. No, multi-layer switch. There's another term they use, multi-layer switch. Works at layer 3. No, it works at layer 2 and it works at layer 3. It doesn't just work at layer 3. It's not what it does. That's kind of how we go with that. So just keep that in mind. And we can take the argument with us afterwards. I assure you, we can have a good time with that one. So I'll also make you aware of, for those of you that have been trying to keep up with what is in all of these different EUI 48 addresses. I'm trying to get an understanding of how to figure out where I get my knowledge of these OSI layers and break these things down for you. I've already done this for you. I've taken everything from my videos that you need to know at a course notes level, and I put them into my own set of course notes. So if you've not been taking notes as you've gone through my videos, it's okay. I got you covered. I have course notes for you. And these course notes, here's what they are. Here's the entire set. I've got them right here in front of me that have subnet classes. It's got the network communication breakdowns, ports and protocols. There's EUI 48 and EUI 64 right here at the top. Even got those ready to go for you. Breakdowns of all the diagrams that I've created for my videos, troubleshooting process, network addresses. I've got IPsec in here. I've got wireless details. I've got the links and the speeds and the fibers and the coppers. It's all in here. So if you would like to get your hands on my set of course notes, I've made them available for you in PDF format. You can buy them. They are completely digital, which means you get them immediately when you buy them on my website, and they're only $10. And every bit of this is going back to keeping the website going and keeping these videos going. I want to thank everybody for your ongoing support with these. It has really been phenomenal. It really helps me. I don't have to worry so much about paying that hosting bill at the end of the month because of that. So thank you so much with those pieces. I've got more questions for you. Let's jump into this. Oh, by the way, I didn't even mention it, professormesser.com/netsg to be able to see those Network Plus Study Group guides. It's our study guides. I think I'm going to rename them course notes because that's really what they are. They're a set of course notes that I've got available. Let's go to the next question. Which of these techniques would be most likely used when performing a packet capture from a switch interface? This is one that came up in the chat room this week. Someone in the chat room, I forget exactly who it was. You probably are in there right now. And you were doing some packet captures through multiple switches. And you were trying to figure out, is this working right or is this not working right? And so I put a number of technologies on here that you would need to know to be able to have things work properly on a switch. And here's your options: port forwarding, universal plug and play, ARP poisoning, port mirroring, NAT traversal. So we got one of those to be able to see this piece. So if you're doing a packet capture from a switch, and obviously this is one where you want to see a lot more than maybe just your traffic to and from the switch, what would you use? It's going to be one of these: port forwarding, universal plug and play, ARP poisoning, port mirroring, NAT traversal. No answering in the chat room, please. You can go to the Socrative.com to be able to answer this one. I've got the questions out there. A number of you answered this one already. I think we've bounced back from that EUI 48 question I asked earlier, haven't we? One of those to get that going. There are a number of challenges when doing packet captures on a switch. A switch is obviously directing traffic inside of the device. You can't just plug into an interface on the switch and see everything. You have to do something first. What is that something? What is the thing you have to do first if you want to be able to see everything inside of that? See, now, I think we're even a couple questions past this and we're still complaining about layer 3 switching inside of the chat room. I knew when I brought it up, I knew it would be a thing. I'm sorry. we're just going to have to argue about that one for a while to have that in the piece. Also, the question came in about the course notes. That covers the entire course. Absolutely. I cover everything from every video that I think made sense to go into the notes. Now, if there are things in the notes that aren't there, that doesn't necessarily mean they're not important. But I think if I'm trying to give you something that is a succinct, very specific set of notes, and I think on my there are 11 pages of these on the Network Plus, so there's quite a bit of content there to work with. So let's go back to this question though, which is about doing packet captures, which is something close to my heart. I used to be a systems engineer for a company that made the sniffer, which was really the original packet capture device. I worked there a long time, so packet capture is in my blood. I love doing that. And when you plug into a switch, you would have to make a change to the switch to be able to see that information. It's 67% have said port forwarding, but we've had a few people say other things as well, or have said port mirroring. I'm sorry, D. Port mirroring, 67%. 12% said port forwarding. 2% said universal plug and play. 9% said ARP poisoning, and 10% said NAT traversal, NAT-T, as we say in the industry. So what is the answer? And if you've ever connected to a switch and you needed to take anything from an interface or a VLAN and send it over to your packet capture, you're going to be doing port mirroring. Port mirroring is the way that you tell the switch, take everything going in and out of an interface or in and out of a VLAN or perhaps to multiple interfaces, take all that information and send it down one link into a packet capture device or protocol analyzer. You might also do this if you're doing security. You're doing some filtering. Maybe you want to see IDS information, intrusion detection. You want to look for vulnerabilities that are coming into your network. Maybe you're streaming to disk. Everything going through your network, you're going to record on disk. It's not an unusual thing to do, to be able to have that there. There is quite a bit when we start working with those technologies and being able to do that. But not all switches will do this. You run into this very, very often, especially lower end switches, and even higher end switches may not do this well. This is not something you want to do all the time. This certainly has its limitations for bandwidth and capacity. I mean, think about it. You've got effectively a connection that's a full duplex connection for gig, which means you could have gig going one direction and gig going the other direction all at the same time. On these very high-speed links, that's not unusual to have very high utilizations in both directions. So a 1 gig link could potentially have a theoretical maximum throughput of 2 gig if it's full duplex. Well, the connection going into your protocol analyzer is one way. Protocol analyzer is not sending anything out. So you can imagine mirroring one of these links and trying to cram 2 gig of potential traffic down what effectively is a 1 gig pipe. And the challenge you run into with many switches is it doesn't handle that very well. It drops packets on the other side. And you have to be very particular about looking at these packet captures and being able to use them properly. Whenever you're setting this up, this is what it might look like. You've got, in this particular case, I've got a workstation. I've got a database server, and I want to see the communication between a workstation and a database server, and you have this thing called a protocol analyzer that you've got connected. So as these are communicating back and forth to each other between the workstation and the database server, it's going to take a copy of that data and it's going to send it off to the protocol analyzer. And really, that's port mirroring. That's how simple it is. As I mentioned, you want to be very careful and very particular about how you're doing the port mirror. Don't simply take every switch, every port on the switch, and send it down to your analyzer. You will run into problems if you do something like that. Let's continue on. I'm running short of time. I have so many questions for you. So I've got another question for you. So let's, in the summary, by the way, those of you that answered the 65% that said port mirroring, you got that one absolutely right. Port forwarding is something you would configure on your router or your layer 3 device coming into your network generally to take something coming in one port and send it somewhere else. It's a way to help work ideally with a NATed type of configuration. Universal plug and play is a Windows and a really hardware functionality where you can plug in a new piece of hardware and it will automatically recognize. You can also see UPnP used on the network side to be able to automatically configure pieces of hardware based on what applications are running on a device. getting into very interesting things there. Art poisoning, with the poisoning piece is used, especially if you're in a security environment or somebody trying to get a man in the middle. It's very common to use art poisoning to do that. And NAT traversal used with a network address translation, especially when you've got IP addresses embedded within application traffic that can't be NATed, and NAT traversal helps you get through some of those things. So let's continue on. I've got, as I mentioned, another question for you. This one came from an email I got that talked about where information goes, where these things are. And I just kind of put a very simple question up. Where would you expect to find the MDF? Where is it? You got to know what an MDF is. After all of that, now I have to figure those pieces out. Fortunately, I've got some options for you. Is it the cloud? Is it the data center? Is it on boot media? Is it a branch office? Or is it in system RAM? So it's one of these. This is one of those where you're going to have to know your cuts of meat. You got to know your acronyms. Got to know your brands of jerky to be able to do that. How would you know where the MDF is? You have to find it. You're in a meeting, and they're going to task you to do something, and they're going to tell you, oh, that particular thing is located in the MDF. Go get it. Oh, you bet. I will go to the MDF right now. As soon as I figure out what that is, which is in the cloud, the data center, on boot media, in a branch office, or in system RAM. It's an MDF. That thing I need is in the MDF. I will go to wherever that is. So now we have to figure that piece out. And a number of you have tried to figure out the MDF and where that happens to be. If you are somebody who's been doing things on the network, this almost becomes secondary, kind of a common thing for you to know what that. We are still literally talking about layer 3 switching in the chat room. Just so those of you on the replay or maybe haven't gotten into this before, trying to understand what a controversy this is, still talking about it. Let's go back to this question, see how we did. We've got a number of people that answered this one, and 79% of you said the MDF's in the data center, of course. That is where it is. Is it on boot media? Nope. Is it a branch office? Nope. I guess it could be in a very, very, very large branch office, could have an MDF, but that's not generally where we find an MDF. It's not in system RAM, and it's not in the cloud. I guess the cloud does have some MDFs, but that's not really what we're talking about when we talk about MDFs. What we're talking about is something called the main distribution frame. Probably looks something like this. If you've ever been in a data center, there's a great walkthrough, by the way, of a Google data center. I think it's a Google data center. You go to Google Maps, and it walks you through the data center. You can see these rows and rows and rows. This is something I do all the time. I'm going into many, many large organizations and going into their data centers where it is just as far as you can see. I was in a bank in Scotland in a brand new data center. It was phenomenal lighting. It was pristine. The cabling was probably literally the best cabling I had ever seen anywhere. This data center was brand new, and they really did it right. And as far as you could see, just down, it was like they were putting the Ark of the Covenant into the warehouse. As far as you could see down there, just row after row of servers. And that is your main distribution frame. That's where everything is. It's really a central point. Everything kind of ties back to the main distribution frame, thus the name main when we're talking about the MDF. Your WAN links go in here. Usually your primary servers are going to go in here. If you've got large virtualization devices, they're going in there. Your routers and your firewalls, all the big stuff is going to go in this MDF. And usually, as it mentions on this slide, if I would stop clicking around to really show you this, there's usually a good place. If you're going to do a packet capture, this is usually a good place to do that packet capture we talked about earlier. If you go to a closet that's somewhere in a remote building, you're probably, or a remote site, you're probably in the IDF, the intermediate distribution frame. This is where everything kind of ends up. If you have everything on a central data center, maybe you're putting individual IDFs on every floor of the building, for instance. This is where the users are usually connecting. Your users usually don't go into the MDF, usually connecting them outside of that main data center. And then there's a central trunk, a very high-speed connection that goes back to the main data center to be able to support that. And that's when we talk about trunking. We talk about having multiple VLANs within a single set of fiber. We're talking about link aggregation and multiple links and load balancing across the network. It's those links between the IDF and MDF where we very commonly see that. The MDF is not between a subscriber and data center. The MDF is the data center. It's the main distribution frame where everything happens to be. It's kind of an old term that we still use in networking. And very often we just call it the MDF and IDF, not even realizing what those terms are. We never say main distribution frame. We never say intermediate distribution frame. We're always saying MDF and IDF. Yes, the MDF's usually near the DMARC as in the chat room. So now we can start combining our nomenclatures together to have that. Yeah, if you're trying to find out, if you find the DMARC and you're standing there looking at your WAN DMARC, you're probably standing in your MDF. Certainly that tends to be the case. Absolutely. So for those of you that did answer the letter B, the data center, you are absolutely correct. It's generally your data center where you are going to find the MDF to be able to do that. So that's when I start looking at these technologies. I try to figure these pieces out too. All right, I've got another one for you. I've got a good bit of time since we started late. I'm going to go absolutely late with these questions, and I've got some additional ones here to go through. Here's one. Which of these? Let me click on this side. Which of these command line utilities would be the best choice for resolving an IP address from a fully qualified domain name? So this is one of those questions we get that is all about command prompts. This is one that really concerns people because learning about the technology, how the cables are wired, understanding the differences between MDF and IDF doesn't require you typing anything. But there is a section of the Network Plus exam that requires you understand different command line utilities and what they do. And there is a command line utility that would be the best choice for resolving an IP address from a fully qualified domain name. Now, here's your challenge as you look at these answers of dig, ping, netstat, mbtstat, traceroute, and route. Some of these will ultimately resolve an IP address from a fully qualified domain name. That's not what I asked. I asked which would be the best choice for, in fact, that's all I want to do. The best choice for resolving an IP address from a fully qualified domain name. I don't want to do anything else. That's all I want to do. That would be my best choice. And this is very common to see these kinds of questions on the exam asking you which would be the best way to do this. Which would be the first thing you should do? Well, and so I want to give you kind of an experience of that. One of these would be the best choice for resolving an IP address from a fully qualified domain name. And the one you're probably thinking about is not on here, which makes it even more of a challenge. So now you're going to have to figure that part out. I will say in the last few minutes, I haven't seen anybody talk about layer 3 switching in the chat room. So get on that, will you? If you want to answer this question, go to Socrative.com to the Professor Messer room. I love these kinds of questions because we're all over the place. We aren't sure exactly which one. Some 33% said ping. We could go with ping. Right behind it, though, 26% said dig. 19% said netstat. 12% said traceroute. Our MBTstat, 7% said netstat. Nobody said route. What happened to route? Nobody's really given route the time of day. So the question is, I want to be able to take a fully qualified domain name, an FQDN, you will see it abbreviated, and I want to take that fully qualified domain name and I want to figure out what IP address it is. That's all I want to do. So one of these only does that. That would be my best choice. Other things listed in here will do that and then do something else. In fact, the something else it does is ultimately what that command was built for. That's not what I'm looking for. So let's look at what the differences are and how we could start to look at the terms Nslookup and dig. These are two separate utilities that you can find. Generally, both of these are available in a Unix or POSIX Linux type platform, Mac OS X. You don't generally see dig on Windows, although you can download dig and install it on Windows, which is really useful if you're getting into doing a lot with name services. Nslookup, you can find on pretty much anything. So if you're at a command prompt, a machine you've never used before, I'll bet Nslookup will be there. It will look up a name and give you an IP address. It will look up an IP address and give you a name. You can do either one of those. The functionality of Nslookup is something we call deprecated. It's something that is no longer being used, no longer being supported. It still works. You can still use it. It's not guaranteed to work in the future. but I use an Nslookup all the time because I'm on a lot of Windows systems and that's what I have available to me at the time. It's a very easy way to use this, and it works. And I need to look to see, I haven't even done this in Windows 8.1 or Windows 10 to see if they stuck dig in there. So somebody in the chat room will be able to answer that for me, or we can bring up a VM once we're done here. Dig stands for Domain Information Grouper. It's been around for a while. It's probably what we're going to start using ultimately. Now, for your Network Plus exam, you have to know both of these. You have to know both dig and Nslookup. One of the things you'll notice, though, I did not give you the choice here of Nslookup. I only gave you dig. Dig is the answer here. That is going to be the best choice for resolving an IP address from a fully qualified domain name. As I mentioned, some of these utilities will do that by default. In fact, if I ping www.google.com, the first thing Ping has to do is do a lookup to figure out what the IP address so they can then ping it. In fact, it will tell you when it pings what the IP address is. So it does do the lookup, but that's not what Ping is built for. Ping is built to send an ICMP request and get an ICMP response if that device is up and running, or if I can access that across the network. That's not my best choice. Netstat, MBTstat, Traceroute, again, programs that you can use that will do name resolution, but that's not what they're designed to do. Netstat gives you network statistics, especially detailed stats about connections on your system, very IP-based. MBTstat, a NetBIOS type functionality in Windows. That's a Windows utility to look at NetBIOS statistics. You're able to communicate via NetBIOS over TCP/IP and communicate to other devices to see what's your Windows name. If I give you a Windows server name, what's the IP address of that device? And Traceroute is able to go through and look at all of the different hops to get from one place to the other. Again, it does resolution, but that's not what it's designed to do. It has a whole nother set of meanings to be able to trace route. And the route command is used on my computer to see routes or to change the IP routing of a device. That's not what we would do to be able to resolve a domain name. If you answered A and dig, you would be digging it because you would be absolutely correct. Speaking of digging it, that makes no sense. This transition makes no sense. Speaking of digging it with Freestyle. Freestyle is a functionality. It's a technology. It's in the cloud. It is what the folks at GTS Learning have put together to give you hands-on with Network Plus. And sometimes that's what you need, is this hands-on capability to be able to work with Network Plus and be able to operate and use these command lines. If you're trying to work on a command line, you're trying to figure out, how does dig work? How does Nslookup work? How can I run a trace route? I don't have all of these utilities in my computer. I don't have a lab set up on my computer. I just want to be able to step through and do some of these things and have something guide me. Well, that's what these practice labs are designed to do. They are available all the time. They're out in the cloud. You don't have to have any special software on your computer to be able to do this. You can simply get that going. In fact, I'm going to choose a lab here, and just to give you a feel for what this looks like, this is the name resolution lab. This makes sense. I think I can pop this out so you can see a little better into a new window. So they have already set up a lab in this environment that looks like this. And this lab is all set up. Let me see if I can zoom a little bit. I got to quit a little program here. So you can see what this lab looks like. It's got a domain controller, a server, a web server, and a client workstation. And you connect to it. In fact, the whole lab is here. Here are all the boxes, the devices. I need to make this a little smaller on my screen. I can power these up. Power up the server. Power up the client. Power up the gateway. Power up the router. And behind the scenes, out there in the cloud, in a data center, in an MDF somewhere, we've got these machines that are starting up, as if you went down to every single one of them on a rack and you hit the power button on all of those, and they're going to start up. So this is like having all of this equipment in your lab facility, in your room, in your office, available to you with all the operating systems already set up and with all of the labs ready to go. In fact, step one takes you through exercise one, working with host names, even gives you screenshots on exactly what you should be doing every step along the way. So again, it's a very easy way to be able to work with this. I'm going to pull up maybe some screens of this. There's my gateway server. I'm going to run a remote access to this gateway server so we can see what it's like. I'm going to run the Java version here, but you could also run this in HTML5, which means you need no software on your computer. And here's Windows Server 2003. It's already set up. It's already running. So this is like having a Windows box right in front of me, because it is. This is a full-blown Windows device. This is not an emulator. It's not a simulation. It's a real Windows machine. At the same time, I can pop over to this server and bring up the server screen and start working with the server. Make changes here, change the name resolution settings, modify those pieces. It's a full-blown Windows, so I can go to my start menu, go to my control panel, make changes to the network configuration. This is exactly how we do it in the future now. In fact, that's really how we're doing it in most data centers these days, is having everything virtualized. It's so easy now to have everything connect to it at an instant. You want to build a database server, you click a button, you got a database server. You want to build a whole lab set of things and run through the labs, they're all waiting for you out on Freestyle. If you want to know more about this, I've got special pricing that they've given me for Freestyle, $99 for a year. If you aren't sure this is really for you, you can also try it for an hour, absolutely free, and see if it's for you. And maybe this works for you, or maybe it doesn't. You can find out all about this at professormesser.com/netlabs, and you'll be able to access those and give them a shot. See if it makes sense for what you're trying to do. These nice folks at GTS Learning, I've worked with these folks for years. Great group of people. This is also one of those things that is really going to help you when it comes to understanding the performance-based questions that you might get on your Network Plus exam. So something to consider if you go out to professormesser.com/netlabs. We also want to thank GTS Learning for their support as well. Well, let's go to more questions. I got plenty more questions. This is the fun part, is the Q&A, right? So I've got this one here that we can go through as soon as I find it on my screen. You hear me banging those keys in the background. That's what I'm doing. Okay, now you'll be able to see the question pop up, which is, in which of these cases would you use an Ethernet crossover cable? You know, cabling is one of those parts of the exam where there's a lot of things that you have to know or understand. Where would you use this kind of cable? How long can this cable be? What type of connectors are at the end of this cable? How is the wiring configured inside of that connector compared to the other side of this? And this is one of the cases where you now have to apply that knowledge. You've been given a crossover cable here, connect it with the crossover cable, and you have to know, what do I do for that? How would I work with those pieces? In fact, if you're watching this for your trying to get the continuing education units, this is your special keyword of the day, which is crossover cable. Send me the term crossover cable by going to professormesser.com, click the Contact Us link at the top, put your name in there, and just send me the word crossover cable. I'll know what it's about. If you want to put another note in there too, say something bad about layer 3 switching, I'm all for it. Send it along to that link. And it may take me a number of days. It might even take me a week to get back to you, but I will send you that digital certificate for the term crossover cable. Now, which one of these would it be? It would be troubleshooting a network interface using a loopback function. Would I be connecting a network device to a switch? Would I be connecting multiple interfaces for link aggregation? Would I be connecting 2 network devices together? Or would I be connecting 2 remote sites together? One of these is going to be the perfect case for an Ethernet crossover cable. So which one is it? No answering in the chat room. This is one where you've got a lot of different types of connections that you would make. You need to understand which type of cable you would plug in between those. On some of these, loopback cable, loopback function, network device to switch, link aggregation, some of these, a crossover cable would be the perfect option for one of these A through E. The other of these Ethernet crossover cable won't work at all. It's not even an option for you. So you really have to know what the differences between all of these different pieces are. So this would be a good way to do it. Let's see if you go out to Socrative.com, you'll be able to answer that question as well. And in this case, I think we bounced back pretty well from that last one. I don't seem to have a lot of people in there. I'm going to let a few of those answer. Here we go. So I've got 18% of you said troubleshooting a network interface using a loopback function. It's crossover. It's loopback. Hello. Makes perfect sense, doesn't it? No, it does not. Nope. That's not what a loopback function is for a network interface. Connecting a network device to a switch, 10%. Not actually the case either. Link aggregation's not where we would use a crossover cable, but the 66% of you that said connecting two network devices together, you would be absolutely correct. So the first one, A, the loopback function, you would use a loopback adapter or a loopback cable, not a crossover cable. They sound similar, but they really are two different things. Connecting a network device to a switch is a simple straight-through cable, a standard Ethernet patch cable. Pin 1 goes to pin 1, pin 2 goes to pin 2, all the way down to pin 8. And so there's no crossing over of those pieces. Link aggregation also uses those straight-through cables as well. It's only when you want to connect network device to network device do you get into using a loopback cable. And that's where if you're connecting what they call MDI to MDI or MDIX to MDIX or MDIX, sometimes we'll call it. This is something we occasionally need on older equipment. What you'll find on the latest Ethernet adapters is that they are configured to, you can plug in a straight through cable and it recognizes, wait a second, you're connecting two devices together. I'm going to automatically cross this over so you don't have to have a special cable in that piece of it, which comes in handy. The crossover cable I've got listed here is one for gigabit networks. For TIM100 networks, you only use 2 pair or 4 of the wires. When you get into gig networking over copper, using all 8 of the wires. So if you want to cross over a gig connection, you need to cross over all 8 wires. So you can see those in that particular case. If you want to look at this, MDIX and MDI, it stands for Media Dependent Interface. We generally think of an MDI interface or an MDI component as being a network interface card in a device. So it would be a network interface card in a server, in a router, in a switch to switch, device to device, router to router. Those are things that you would need to be able to configure these things together and connect both together. MDIX. Generally, I guess that would really be your switch connection. But if you go MDIX to MDIX, you also need crossover. That would be a switch to switch, for instance. And when you think about this, there's a lot of crossovers you have to deal with. Someone in the chat room says, so is this different for 568A versus B? Well, the colors are different, but the pins are exactly the same. The only difference between 568A and 568B is the color. There's no real difference in how you're wiring things. Pin 1 still goes to pin 1, whether it's 568A or 568B. Pin 2 still goes to pin 2, 3 to 3 if you're doing a straight through cable. So that's where you run into those challenges. Router to switch would be a straight through. That would be MDIX to MDI. Interface on a router, interface on a server, interface on a workstation is an MDI, interestingly enough. Switch would be the MDIX. That's where we run into that. This is not 568A to 568B. Really is not. This is a crossover cable. And I say that because there are other technologies that have crossover cables that don't follow this standard. Fortunately, all we have to know is Ethernet. So that does come in handy when we start to work with those. So that is where we get the crossover cable, where we would use it. And if you were one of the 64% of the people that said, yep, that's exactly where you would use it to be able to do that. Well, that brings us up to, are we at where we're just over an hour of this? And I think we've hit the end of those pieces of that. I still have a couple of questions left, but I'm gonna hold those off because I got some questions that came in this month that I want to get to before we finish up with this hour. So you can get this piece of it. And we'll open up the phone lines just after this. One thing that I'd mentioned throughout this particular study group, in fact, I mentioned it right away, was the exam objectives. It's so important to know exactly what's on the exam. And people are sending me emails every month saying, what should I know to really pass this exam? Is there a certain topic that has more of an emphasis on the exam than another? How do I know when I'm ready to go in and take my exam? And the answer to all of these is that you should have the exam objectives. Here they are. The exam objectives list out everything for you. It's all in the exam objectives. I'm going to pull up my list of exam objectives just to give you a feel for this. I say this on every study group. I know. Eventually, you're going to get tired of hearing me saying this with these pieces, but the exam objectives, they are everything. Now, One of the nice things about CompTIA is the exam objectives are pretty comprehensive. Not all manufacturers have exam objectives that are this comprehensive. But CompTIA is telling you everything, not just how much of different topics will be on the exam. But I'm just going to go down to networking topics. Section 1, topic 1.1, compare the layers of the OSI and TCP IP models. Here's the OSI model and what you need to know. Here's the TCP IP model and what you need to know. In fact, it even says you may see this described differently depending on what you're reading. Section 1.2, classify how applications, devices, and protocols relate to the OSI model layers. And you have to know all of these. Now, if you just keep scrolling down, look at all this information. Oh, looks like I was highlighting something. What was I doing? I don't remember. But we've got now a list of all of the things that I have to know. If I can go through this list and just check off one after the other what I need to know, then I am pretty much ready to take the exam. I can check off, oh yeah, I know on a SOHO network, the list of requirements, the cable links, device types, environmental limitations, equipment limitations, compatibility requirements. I got that section cold. Let's go to the next section and I'll work with section 3. Understand those pieces. This is where you should go. Go to professormesser.com/objectives. I've got a hot link there that takes you to the CompTIA site where you can get those listing of objectives and work with those. Comes in really handy for trying to determine if you are ready to take that exam. I think that's what I would recommend everyone be able to do, is have a look at those exam objectives. Incredibly important for your exam. I've got one last question. I'm going to scream through some questions on the list. You may see other questions go by, but really I'm getting to this question about which topic would I like to cover on my next Network Plus study group. So in your Socrata front end, you should see that listed, and it's really just a blank screen. I'm just giving you this screen to type something to me to say, what do I like to cover? Now, if you're watching the replay, this probably isn't available to you, but you can still do a couple of things. You can go to the Professor Messer website. There's a Contact Us link at the top. What Contact Us link means contact me, goes directly to me, pops up on my email, on my phone, pops up everywhere. Because I want to know when you're sending me something, I want to know, and I try to answer back every time somebody sends me something. At least with a link and a place to go with those. You could also alternatively call in to our call-in line, our studio line. That is always available. You can leave a voicemail at any time on the studio lines. If you go to professormesser.com/live, you'll see it listed there. It's 855-785-7545. That's 855-785-RJ45. So that will get you to the voicemail. If we're having a live show, you'll be calling into the live show. If I'm not having a live show, there's a voicemail there that you can leave, and maybe you can leave a question. We'll pop it up on the next study group. We can all talk about that question as well. So I will be checking in with the things that you are leaving. A number of you are already putting some of the answers there. Subnetting, wireless standards, VLANs. I choose. It's mine. I ask you, so you have to put something in. So that's one of the things that I do run into, is being able to figure out what you want to hear about. So that's important for me to know as well. Well, that covers it up for the first hour. I think we've gone through everything. For those of you watching live, stick around. We do a whole nother after show where I open up the phone lines. You can call in, and I tend to talk about who knows what. It could be networking. It could be something else. But for those of you that are here now, thank you for watching this first hour. Remember that Network Plus study guide you can find at professormesser.com/netsg. But we're doing things here all the time. And if one of the things that maybe you watch the free videos, but you don't have the money to buy a study guide or purchase the offline courses, one of the things you can do for absolutely free that really does help me a lot is go to my YouTube page, professormesser.com/YouTube. It'll redirect you over to YouTube, and subscribe. I know that a lot of people on YouTube, you always see subscribe. And the reason you see them saying that is because it's so important. This helps me get information to and from YouTube. So I'm able to do these live streams. I'm able to put my videos out on YouTube. It doesn't cost anything to do that, and it makes them available to you wherever you happen to be in the world. You can follow me on Twitter. One of the things we'll be doing shortly is having a Network Plus pop quiz of the day. You've been asking for it for years, literally for years. It's coming. And if you follow me on Twitter, you get one of those every day coming up here shortly. There's also Google Plus. and Facebook. You do see everything that goes on Google+. You may not see everything I put on Facebook because Facebook doesn't show that to you. But if you want to see those pages, that's where they are. And remember, save 10% on taking your exam by getting a discount voucher at professormesser.com/vouchers. I want to thank GTS Learning again for their extra special pricing they give us. You can find out more at the professormesser.com/netlabs. And thanks for all of you. I have such support in the chat room throughout the month. You send me the emails. People tell me when they pass their exams. Nothing could be more motivating than that. We're going to keep making these videos as long as you keep watching them. Thanks for joining us today on the live stream as well. I think that also is nice to see everyone there. I think we had some great questions this time. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time on the study group. Yes, a Network Plus pop quiz. Oh, there's things happening here. I'm not messing around. I've got it going on. That's not the only thing. I'm trickling it out a little bit at a time. Just a little bit at a time. So there you go. Oh, let's open up the phone lines. I got to figure out how to do this because it's a new system. Let's host a show, and I have to call into the show. I have to figure out how all these things work. Let's start the show. And now I have to call in, which means I have to turn this down, which means I have to find my Skype and make sure that you can't see me typing in the secret numbers. Contacts. Call that. Boop, 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 boop. Let's listen in, shall we?
Thank you for calling Call-In Studio.
You're welcome.
And call screener line.
Yes.
Please enter your show number and press pound.
I will do that if I can find it. I have to move everything out of the way so I can do that. Oh, I probably messed that up now. My show. Okay. Oh, see, somebody's already doing the.
Enter your 6-digit PIN number.
Somebody's doing the DTMF in decoding right now. I can feel it. That's why I'm turning this down so I can't even hear it.
You are now in the host room and can manage your calls.
Okay, I can manage my calls. So some of you are there. I'm sorry if you just called in trying to get in. You can get in now. So I've got those lines open. We'll let that piece go. Yes, there's a lot going on. We've got to, for those of you that didn't see this last month, we're in the new studio. So we've got all new digs. Oh, pardon me. There's still more to do here. I've got lights that are still on the floor. You can almost see the sticks that are coming down. Those are going to be up on the ceiling soon. I've got a lot to work with there along those lines, but there's a lot that is also happening on this side. And I want to ask the chat room, I said in the beginning of the study group, there we go. Said in the beginning of the study group, that I was able to find what are probably close to the last set of exam objectives for the N10006. And it would be interesting to know if anybody else was able to find those. And you have to do some very interesting Googling to be able to find that piece, but got my hands on those. It's one of those things when you're not part of CompTIA, you can have to wait for them to tell you things, or you wait for Google to hand these things to you. That worked out pretty nice. Yeah, the studio did turn out to be pretty good. This is the format of it is exactly the same that we had in the old studio. So the mixer, the monitors, everything's exactly the same. The video switcher, I'm going to be changing some things though. I think I'm going to be changing the streaming provider, as if the problems I ran in today with YouTube weren't enough. That may be the emphasis I have for changing things over to a new streaming provider. Or maybe not. I keep going back and forth. That's one of those challenges. I do have, where's the number? There it is. So now you can call in on the studio line. See, I got the lower thirds. It would have been better if it was animated. It could fly in, it could do some things, it could flip around. It could be really awesome when it worked through those things. So some of you in the chat room were talking about boot camps. Are boot camps good or boot camps bad? Boot camps, I guess they have their purpose. They serve their purpose. They are not something you should jump into. Boot camps, by the way, is a training class that is designed to teach you everything you know to pass the exam in generally it's about 5 days or 10 days. It's a week or 2 weeks. It's a boot camp. I don't believe we have to do any push-ups, but you do go to class all day, every day, sometimes into the evening, because there's a lot of content. And as you might think, that's not a lot of time to learn everything. And you'd be absolutely correct. Having to learn all of that information in such a short period of time is almost insurmountable. But if you're someone who is already familiar with the content, you've read through a certification book, you've watched some of my videos, you've got a comfort level and you're just not ready to take the exam yet, you want some validation, you'd like to go to a class and have some conversation with an instructor, maybe they have some hands-on, perhaps this makes sense for you. Go and take a 1-week cram session group study boot camp and do that. But as we're mentioning in the chat room, these are really expensive. They could cost thousands of dollars for 1 week of training. I feel like I'm in the wrong business. So you really have to know what you're going to do. Otherwise, if you know nothing and you walk into a 1 week A+ or Network Plus boot camp or Security Plus boot camp, there's no way you're going to get a week of good training out of that. You're going to be overwhelmed on day one and you'll never be able to catch up. You're going to miss almost everything coming on and being taught in the class. So don't run into that piece on those. You don't want to, but maybe some of you, maybe sometimes you do that. Yeah, I've looked at other providers. I think I've got an idea of what streaming provider I want to use. I know others. There's plenty of SDNs out there to choose from, and I've been researching. But I also want to do 1080p streaming, which I'm not doing on YouTube right now. I need additional hardware on my side to be able to do. It's kind of silly. I need additional hardware to be able to do 1080p streaming. This won't do it, oddly enough. It's actually really software that I'm going to have on there to be able to do it. But that's one of those things to be able to do that. We've got some folks in the call. Let's see if I can go to the 213 area code. Are you there, caller? What's your name? 213. Are you there, caller? I don't hear anything. You know, one benefit, I'm going to put you back in the queue. Maybe we'll pick up there a little bit later. One of the benefits of having that number, the 855-785-RJ45, is that it is it's a toll-free number, which means you can, of course, use it toll-free in the United States, and it's probably continental United States, but it works anywhere in the world on Skype for absolutely free. So you can be anywhere and be able to do that. And now things are making noises. Let's talk to the 661 area code. Are you there, caller?
Good morning, Professor.
It is Anthony.
How are you doing this morning, Professor?
It's interesting you would ask. I've actually been up for a while. I completely forgot that one of my sons had a school event, a Latin competition. I had no idea there were Latin competitions.
Is he dancing?
It's not dancing, and it is literally the Latin language competition.
Oh.
How you like that? So I didn't realize he had to be there at 7:45 this morning. For those of you that don't really follow me, I'm up to the wee hours of the morning. I'm a night owl, so I forgot that he had to be there. And Mrs. Professor Messer poked me in the side about 6 o'clock and said, "Aren't you getting up and going somewhere?" Like, no. Why? Oh, so that question about what if how's my day been so far has been scrambling around, and at the same time trying to get the studio set up, trying to get everything going. It's been a little chaotic. How's your day, Anthony? Enough about me.
I can't complain. Things have been great. I guess that's all of us go through that. I have 2 daughters that are working and 2 sons in school.
Wow.
So I know what that 7 o'clock in the morning, get up and let's go is.
You're a busy man.
Didn't you remember you were supposed to take him to run this morning?
Right.
Oh, really? Wow.
Nope.
Okay, it's time to go then, huh?
It's let's go. You just make do. Okay. You're about as flexible as you could be when you get to that point, aren't you? Sure. Whatever.
There you go.
Go with the flow.
I was calling number 1 to find out which Wireshark version that you're using.
Yes, there are multiple Wireshark versions right now. And one of the things I think they're really working hard on is bringing everything back to kind of one interface. If you use Wireshark and you use Wireshark on Mac and you use Wireshark on Linux and you use Wireshark on Windows, you'll notice there are subtle differences between all of them. Just in the user interface. The functionality is exactly the same. If everybody goes out to, I'm bringing this up on my screen so that everybody can see it, wireshark.org, you can download these and you'll notice there are different versions available. There's a stable version, which is the 1.12.3, and generally I stick with the stable versions to do that. But notice there's a development version, which is Wireshark 1.99.1, and it's one they're working on to kind of bring together some of these user interface things and some other features in there that are pretty nice, especially if you're in a Linux or a Mac environment, but it is not feature complete quite yet. So I tend to stick with the stable version. Although one came out January 7th, I don't know that I've downloaded the January 7th version yet. But I use Wireshark all the time. And I recently, in fact, had a problem with an application I was using, and the folks were saying it's working fine, and I got the trace file and said, actually, if you look at this, here's what's happening. And so having that knowledge of what's going on across the network, I think, is fundamental to doing anything in networking. If you're doing switch administration, router administration, firewall administration, you're crimping cables, I think you should know what's going across those wires and those fibers and understand what's going on. And Wireshark's a great way to do that.
Okay. I downloaded one version, but I'm not sure if it's the right one. I have Windows Vista running.
Sure.
So I think I'm going to try it again because I tried to get it to run and it wouldn't do anything. So I might have got the wrong version of Wireshark.
Get the latest stable Wireshark version 1.12.3. A couple things in Windows to keep in mind. In Windows, you have to install this as an administrator. And we don't mean that you have admin rights, so you just install it normally. I mean you're right mouse clicking on it and you're choosing to run it as administrator.
Admin, yeah.
Which is different than simply running it as someone who has administrator rights. Those are two different things in Windows. They're not very different, but they are different. So make sure that if you're installing a program, you're doing that, especially with Wireshark, because during the installation, it installs something called WinPCAP. This is a packet capture library that you have to have in order for Windows to be able to work properly. Normally applications don't capture packets. They're not looking at everything coming across the wire or across the wireless network and grabbing that data. So it's really important that you have whatever library, WinPCAP library is, and they bundle it with the Wireshark installation. It goes through and it determines whether you have the latest version. If you don't, it offers to install it, and you should absolutely say yes if it asks that of you. And if you run into other problems there, Wireshark has a great wiki. They have a fabulous online community, and you can sometimes ask questions there about what you're seeing and how you're seeing it and get some feedback from them as well.
Okay.
And you will love what you'll see. You'll get inundated. You'll see a lot of information. But what a great place to start. And I think it's a great place to learn your OSI model, learn how IP works, see what routing's going on, look at dynamic routing protocols. If you're doing anything with networking, you have to know how to use Wireshark.
Exactly. That's why I decided to go ahead and download it and start putting it in application and see what I can do with it.
Absolutely. It's very important. In the chat room, Christine's asking, could I speak to the security concerns with Wireshark usage? Capturing packets on a network, if it's just information to your computer, that's fine because you're at your computer. But capturing packets going across the entire network can be a security concern. In fact, we always worry that there's going to be a man in the middle looking at our traffic. What if the person in the middle is just the network administrator who's just doing their job? There are security concerns whenever you grab any information from the network. If you are in in a corporate environment and you're not in the networking group, don't run Wireshark, don't run Nmap, don't run these programs that are going to be grabbing and looking at data unless there's a specific need. If you're a developer and you're working on networking pieces, there's a need for it. But if you simply load it on your computer and you're in the accounting department, you're in shipping and receiving, I'm wondering what you're doing at that point, and you don't want to be put in a position where you may be looked at as if you were doing something improper, even if you aren't. Just ask, and if you ask a networking person about Wireshark, they'll have plenty to say to you and have plenty of conversations about what you can do with Wireshark, I assure you.
Okay. I also wanted to talk about, I was running a operation system cleanup through Avast, and ran across a Windiller-DK Trojan.
Sure.
This came through a Chinese medicine company that I buy my Chinese herbs through.
Okay.
And I guess that's the third man in the transmission.
Something is in there, or is it? So here's going to be the challenge, of course, is that these programs that examine what's on your computer, these antivirus programs, anti-malware programs, work in a couple of different ways, in a few different ways, to identify malicious software. Most of the time they're using signatures. They are looking for a specific pattern of information within a file. If it identifies that pattern, it says this is this particular kind of piece of malware or something that's really bad. And generally they're really good at doing that. But of course, there can be cases where a pattern of information inside of a file is the same as the pattern that's in their database, but it is not really a piece of malware. So that would be a false positive if it informed you, hey, there's malware here, but there really isn't. The second thing, of course,
it came through Google.
Sure. Well, this is one of the things that is so difficult to keep track of these days, is that we're starting to see this malware come in from so many different places, even through installation media now, and seeing it on these pieces. You can't even trust the executables you're getting. Now, it's entirely possible that that particular manufacturer was infected and that infection got into the files they're sending to you. That's possible. So it could be absolutely legitimate. One of the things you can do, of course, is you're only running this on one piece of antivirus that's in your computer. It would be nice to be able to see this across many pieces of malware and be able to look at that. So I've mentioned this before. If you go to virustotal.com, this is a way that you can upload that file to VirusTotal, which is now owned by Google. And when you upload that file, it will scan the file through really a massive number of known antivirus and anti-malware applications. So it's almost like you had loaded everything that you could possibly scan in the world. It'll stick it in there and scan it for you. So let me see if I can do one. They may even have one here that's already run. And am I missing it? Let's look at the latest comments. Will probably have something. Do I have links back to these? Maybe, maybe not. We'll go to what some of these are. Here's one, for instance. Somebody uploaded this one, and you can see it ran through it. Make it a bit bigger for those of you out there in the world. Ran it through Bitdefender, Adinus Labs, Aegis Lab WebGuard, Alien Vault, blah, blah, blah. We'll keep scrolling. It's gone through ESET, Fortinet, Kaspersky, Malware Patrol, Netcraft, Opera, Sophos. Look at how many different things it's doing. Now, for this particular file, Bitdefender said it was a phishing site, and then all of these other sites said, yeah, it's fine. It's either clean or unrated. This happened to be a URL that people are doing. But you can upload whatever file you want. It's absolutely free. Throw it in there. It will scan it in all of these, or it will say, hey, we scanned this yesterday. Do you want to see the results of that, or do you want to rescan it? You've got the option, and it'll tell you. That'll give you a pretty good idea of whether what's inside that file is really malicious or not. But don't take this as the final version, because there is malware that is brand new right now. There's new malware coming out every hour, more than every hour. Every day there's plenty of new malware that's created. It takes time for the antivirus company to get a copy of that malware, bring it into their labs, go through it, find something unique about it, create a signature, and then provide that signature to their testing, make sure the signature doesn't break anything, make sure there are no false positives with that signature, and then finally deploy it out to their users, and the users then have to download it and install it. There could be days that go by between the time that a piece of brand new malware is created and put into the wild and the time that your antivirus software may identify it. So this is a good first step, but it's not comprehensive. It can't tell you everything, but it may give you a few more clues to go along with that.
Yeah, I had one that came in through Windows 32 Mile E /Gen / Adobe Flash Doc executable.
Yeah.
Executable.
You'll see malware coming in through Flash files, through PDF documents. PDF's nothing but a collection of different files that it sticks into a format. That's a great place to put Word documents. You can fit Flash in there. The bad guys fit all kinds of things in PDF. They put them in macros inside of Word documents and spreadsheets. Everything these days is coming through, and you just have to stay abreast of really what's happening and keep an eye on what you're running on your computer in the hopes that you can avoid any problems with something like that.
Sounds good, Professor.
Well, thanks, Anthony.
Thanks for the
Good
info.
luck. And let us know when you run that through with the virus total, what happens with that.
I will definitely do that.
Very good,
You
sir.
have a nice weekend.
You too. Talk to you later.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I use virus total all the time. All the time. All the time. Let's go to 559. Are you there, 559? Are you there, 559? What's your name?
Hello.
Oh, there he is. Hello. What's your name?
My name is Amin.
Hello, Amin. What can we do for you today?
Yeah, hello. Yeah, thank you, Professor, for all your videos. We learn a lot from your videos.
My pleasure. Thanks for calling. What can we do for you?
Yeah, I got a security question, please, about DDoS attacks.
Sure.
Yeah, it's like I would like to know what are the mitigation techniques deployed by nowadays enterprises for mitigating DDoS attacks?
My best mitigation for a distributed denial of service is to put my head under a pillow and hope that it goes away. There are so few things that you can do when somebody is implementing something this unique. So the way this really happens, and we're seeing this, it's a very common thing these days, and you're seeing it happen to big companies. You're seeing it happen to PlayStation Network, to Xbox Network, to the Blizzard's networks. They're hitting game services, and of course, companies around the world every day are getting hit with distributed denial of service attacks. For those of you that aren't familiar with these, the bad guys are getting malware onto a computer, and they're doing this, sending out the spam or finding ways to infect your machine, and then they just sit there. And that malware checks in with a central location, generally through something like an IRC chat, but it could also check in through a web service and checks in to see how things are going. Usually the web service is going, that's fine. We don't have anything for you. But at some point, the bad guy, now that he's collected hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, or even hundreds of thousands, and there have been malware botnets in the millions before, those botnets are now under the control of somebody who could say, I would like all of you devices out there to go out and start sending information to this Xbox network IP address or series of IP addresses. Imagine 1 million devices, or even not even. It doesn't take much for denial of service. Hundreds of thousands of devices all at once asking for resources from a single server. You will bring that device down. There's no device in the world that could stand up to that, because you're not sure what traffic is good and what traffic is bad. It's all coming from different IP addresses. It's coming from different parts of the world. It's all of these machines that are under the control of that particular bad guy. So your question, of course, is, all right, so how do I fix this if this becomes an issue? What do we do? And from an end user perspective, it's kind of limited what you're able to do to be able to stop these. If the bad guy wants you down, he will simply send too much information down that link to take you down. One of the things that is traditionally done is you do this and affect it at the ISP level, but it assumes that something in that traffic will be able to make it unique or be able to differentiate from other things that are going on in the normal type of traffic. I had a distributed denial of service attack on my server a couple of weeks ago. So I know what type of traffic I would expect to see into my computer. And one of the things with this attack is it was the same packet over and over and over again. And the packet itself was something that was requesting something at the application layer from my web server, and something that most people don't request from my web server. So it was very easy for me to parse out and see, wait, that's a denial of service. And then I was able to take that information to my service provider and say, can you block everything at the upstream router that has this on it? And they were able to accomplish that.
Yeah.
And that's one of the ways to do it.
Because it is,
Go ahead.
yeah, there is something called black holing and thin holing. But this mitigation techniques, it drops all the packets like legitimate and malicious one, which is not really good techniques.
No technique is going to work 100%, unfortunately.
Yeah.
A number of people will block anything that's an IP address range that's not inside of their native country. There's another way to do it. So you can block everything coming from China and Russia is a very common thing for people to do. There's techniques within routers and firewalls that can see how many connections are suddenly ramping up, and they can start dropping connections so that it keeps a buffer and at least keeps availability. Of course, at that point, you aren't really sure, am I dropping good traffic or dropping bad traffic? You're just dropping traffic because so much is coming in, and you're trying to maintain at least some uptime for some portion of people that are connected to your services. It's a real challenge to be able to stop these things, and that's why it's working. That's why these bad guys can go on Twitter and brag about bringing down Xbox Network or PlayStation Network, because they're so good at doing it. It's so easy for them because of all the botnets that are distributed, and in some cases they're making money on it. They're selling their botnet to other people. If you don't like a particular service, you could buy the botnet's time to attack the service of your choosing. All you have to do is give them bitcoins and you're good to go. So there's no good way to do this, and that's why when Xbox goes down, I was playing Destiny the other day. Xbox went down. I went on Twitter. It was a third-party group that brought down Xbox, and they were bragging about it. But other people were saying, why can't Xbox fix this? Microsoft needs to fix this. There's nothing they can do. If they want to bring down the Xbox network, they will bring down the Xbox network. The way you fix it is you get the authorities involved, and they start arresting people, which they've started doing. And that's one of the best ways to mitigate distributed denial of service attacks.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Professor. Thank you very much.
Good luck with that, and thanks for calling.
Yeah, thank you. Have a nice weekend.
You too. Bye-bye. My past history in the last few years, I worked for a large firewall company, next generation firewall company, and obviously we get into distributed denial of service, firewalling, security on the network, malware, malware scanning. There's a tremendous concern out there. Distributed denial of attacks in the chat room. Justin's asking, isn't that really SYN flooding? That's one technique, is sending so many SYNs to a device that you can then overwhelm the services running on a particular server. But it doesn't have to be SYN flooding. The one that was attacking my server was somebody asking for something very particular within the content management system that I use, and they were asking for a particular function to run. And it was very specific, and they were doing it from multiple IP addresses and doing it constantly and overwhelming. Even though I've got multiple servers and they're load balanced, it created a performance problem. I have monitoring tools on my servers. They're constantly checking the experience that you are having. If it goes past a certain number of seconds of response time, it sends me a message immediately. I see the spike. I can go in and see what my performance is. Immediately, I can look at my logs, I can find who's there, and I can start blocking things. So in my case, was not SYN flooding. In fact, SYN flooding, that's old school. Look for things like NTP, distributed denial of service attacks. Google that one and see how scary it is to do these reflection attacks where the bad guy isn't even attacking you. They're using other services to then attack you. Very scary in how that works. In my case, I was able to find the IP addresses and just block the IP addresses on my infrastructure side. I didn't even have to go to the ISP, because in my case, it was a handful. It was still distributed, but it was not massive distributed. I was able to really easily find those and nuke them. And then I added some new firewall rules, and I changed the way my servers talk to each other, and I modified my reverse proxy in a way they helped me be even more secure with how things are going. And I think I have mitigated that particular opening into my servers so that now they have to go through my reverse proxy, which they were getting around. Now they go through my reverse proxy. That's the only way in. And at my reverse proxy, I have a lot of security, monitoring, denial of service checking. I got a lot of stuff there. So it comes in handy. You will find sometimes your ISP will turn you off. They'll turn off your internet connection, and they'll send you a message. Comcast does this. They can send you a message that says, we have seen something on your network participate in a denial of service attack. We've disabled your internet until that's fixed. And they'll inform you. And then you have to now fix those things. It could be quite a problem with that. Let's go to 540. Are you there? What's your name, caller?
Yes, I'm here. This is Joshua.
Hello, Joshua. What can we do for you today?
Hi, Professor Messer. First off, I just want to thank you for everything.
My pleasure.
You are such a huge inspiration, and you've helped me obtain my first certification just this past November.
Oh, congratulations.
Which is fantastic.
What'd you get?
I got an A+ certification.
Nice. So now it sounds like you're working on Network Plus.
Yes. Now I'm studying for Network Plus.
Okay.
So I just had a more of a general question. So I recently got a new job, and it requires me to have a laptop on the go.
Okay.
I'm a field technician, and I wanted to know, does it make sense to be interested in getting a Mac computer? I've just had an interest in that particular computer for a little while. And I wasn't sure if it was silly of me to get that instead of a Windows, maybe an Asus or a Lenovo.
This is whatever I answer in this particular question will be debated heavily in the chat room. I'm just going to say that from the very beginning, because this is a religious question. It's a philosophical question about how you want to live your life, Joshua. It is, for some reason, it goes well deep within the skin of many people. But I can tell you that here's what I'll say at a very broad level. This will drive everyone crazy. Doesn't really matter. Doesn't matter, because the functionality in a Windows environment and the functionality for Mac OS X, and really perhaps even you could almost bring Linux in almost at this point. And there's a number of caveats there. And now the Linux people will complain about me. But all of these operating systems are pretty evenly functional at a very broad level. So there are things, though, with each operating system that they tend to do very well. In the work that I do now is very security based, and because of the number of vulnerabilities and known attacks to Windows, a lot of the engineers that walk around carry Macs, because not that they're more secure. I think we could argue they're less attacked. We'll put it that way. I use Mac OS X on my desktops because I've got a lot of video editing that I do. So everything that you see in front of you, practically speaking, is an iOS device. Actually, the video switcher that you're seeing this video from is a Windows machine. So even in this environment, I can't centralize on a single operating system, because some operating systems and hardware combinations and software combinations really work best in a Windows or Mac OS X or Linux, because if you're on my website right now, you're on Linux. So I got a little bit of everything. So I guess it would really depend on if there are certain applications that must run in Windows. This is becoming, or a Mac OS X, becoming rarer and rarer to find that particular instance. Or ultimately, it often depends on what your IT organization is willing to support. If they'll do either, then you just find the one that you're happier with or that works for you. Some environments, though, only will support you if you're running a Windows desktop. And I mean, that's fine too. There's some great Windows computers out there. I was just watching, and I'm trying to remember which model it was. It may have been an Asus. It may have been a Dell, where the company had taken the same hardware specifications and generally the same operating size of the device and duplicated what an Apple MacBook Air was. So they got the same small system, but of course it was running Windows 8.1. I thought that was brilliant. So you've got kind of the benefits of a Mac hardware, because it's an Intel box. They're all Intel boxes these days. And they had created one that had the same look and feel. So you're really not losing anything. You can just use whatever operating system you'd like to run on that one. Now, of course, with a Mac desktop, you could dual boot into Windows as well. They make that, it's built in with Boot Camp into the Mac operating system. You can't reverse that. You can't be on Windows and boot into Mac OS X, because Apple does not license you to be able to do it that way. So there may be some benefits. You're going to pay a little more for Apple hardware. Some might say legitimately, some might say not. I guess we get to argue about that in the chat room now for the next 30 minutes. That's fine.
Definitely.
We can do that.
Well, all right. Well, thank you very much. That definitely helps me out and clears up that question for me. I really appreciate it, Professor.
Absolutely. Thanks for calling.
Yeah, no problem.
I go back and forth. I used to do everything in my studio I did in Windows. And it was a very specific situation with how the operating system handled automatically updating OS patches that caused me to move. There in Windows, there were certain patches that come from Microsoft that even if you tell the operating system, do not reboot, it'll reboot. You can't stop it. Just reboot it. And this was Windows 7. Just reboot it. Well, when I started rendering these, my machines were taking all night to render some of my videos. I mean, hours and hours and hours and hours. So I would start rendering. It's a 7-hour render. I go to bed. I come back in. My computer's at a desktop. What? I'm on a UPS. What happened? What's going on? I go through the event log. Oh, it rebooted. Rebooted because of a patch. And that was that. That was that for Windows. Now, I understand now Windows 8.1 got more control, and there's things you can do better now. But it was one of those things where I rage quit Windows 7. That's kind of how it worked. That was what we're going to do. Push all of that off the desk, put an Apple in here, and do those pieces. So that's just how it worked for me. It was a change to go from Windows to OS X because it's a different workflow. The operating system is different, obviously. The file system is different. And when you're working with video or really with any job you do, there's a workflow involved. The workflow in Apple's very different. The type of files that you use to edit are very different. So it wasn't so easy. It's a lot of a challenge to be able to move from one operating system to another. That's why people tend to grab one and go with it. Windows tends to work for a lot of people in going that piece. I love the Windows operating system. I do training videos on Windows, so it's an operating system I use and I enjoy. I have Mac OS X as my standard desktop. As I mentioned, the video switching software that you're seeing, the lower third and switching between all these things, I almost wish I had the video switching software I could show you on the screen. I don't have it set up that way right now. It's all running in Windows. I rely on that for almost everything I do because it's not only used for these live streams. I use it when I'm recording my training videos. It records to disk. I can simply grab the file off the disk when I'm done and start editing immediately. And I have to have that. All runs in Windows. It's all Windows 7. So it's one of those that I can pretty much do anything on any operating system these days. Linux is a little bit different. Linux doesn't have quite the application support as a Windows or an OS X. There's no surprise there. While Linux doesn't quite have the device driver support that Windows and OS X, again, no surprise there. But if you just need a machine that is a Windows browser, you're watching Netflix, you're going through and on the internet and playing games, and doing everything in a browser or even things in the operating system. It's an incredibly powerful operating system. I rely on Linux every day to run the Professor Messer website. So I'm in my command line and I'm changing things and I'm updating files and I'm working in that operating system too. So I can't say one is better or different. One is better than the other. They're absolutely different than the other. But you do run into those scenarios where it becomes a bit of a challenge. Now in the chat room, it didn't quite... maybe I used enough tap dancing there to become very controversial because nobody really complained too much about that. And for some reason, we're not talking about layer 3 switches anymore. which is kind of sad. That was enjoyable for a while to watch all of that go by. I didn't even delete any of it. I may go back and have a look at that conversation. I can go back to the logs that were in the chat and I can look through them and just see exactly what was going on there. It's tough because they confuse us, especially if you're just getting into networking. They confuse you by mixing things together and squeezing them together and expecting you to really understand what's going on there. It's so hard to keep up with those pieces and know what's happening with those. Is Linux more for developers and web servers? Well, it would depend on what you're developing and what web server you're putting together. There are a huge number of Windows-based web servers out there in the world. Very large implementations of them. There's very large implementations of Linux-based web servers out there. Many developers working in a Linux environment. I do development. I'm working in OS 10 because I'm developing for some iOS stuff. So you have no choice. You have to use OS 10 if you're developing for iOS. Maybe you're developing for Android. You can be in Linux. You can be in Windows. You can be in OS 10. So it just depends. Depends on what you're doing and how you're doing it with those pieces. So I will remind you, although the studio line is up now, if you're watching this on a replay and you would like to ask a question, you can call in anytime, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This is the studio line. So this is one that if we're here, you'll see that the show is started and you'll be able to get there, or you can leave a message and then I can replay that for the next study group if that's something you would like to do as well. Just a reminder there. Told you I was fighting with this in the studio earlier today. For those of you, I mentioned at the top of the show that we were late getting started. So of course I sent out my tweet and sent it out. I have an automatic system, so I set it up days before that say 5 minutes before. Send out the tweet that says we're live, because usually I'll start this thing up about 15 minutes before we really get going. I wasn't there. I didn't show up till 20 minutes later. And it's because there's a system that's used on the YouTube side to set up the live event. And once it's configured and set up, I set up my page so that you can get to it on the Professor Messer website. And I then everything's set. Then I come into my studio. There's one big button in front of me that says stream. I click the stream button. Literally that easy. Click the stream button. I've already pre-configured it with going to YouTube, because every time you set up a new stream, it's a new configuration. So I have to go into my switching software, but it's all set up for me. So I sat down, clicked the stream button, went to YouTube, said, start the stream. And it said, nope, not going to do that. No, start the stream, click. And it gave me some odd message. I'm trying to remember what the message was. I'll have to go back in my Google search because I searched for it. Like any good technician does, you see an error message you've never seen before, type it into Google. I typed it into Google, and the error message that I got, the response I got was somebody going, yeah, that's not right. That didn't work. Like, well, that doesn't help me. I had to delete it and recreate it. Like, okay, well, I got plenty of time. I deleted it. I recreated it. That one didn't work for a completely different set of reasons. Okay. Third time's a charm, right? Deleted that one. Deleted everything, logged everything out of YouTube, went back into YouTube, created a new stream, went back into my video switching software, pointed it to the new stream, started the stream on my switching software, started the stream on my laptop controller to YouTube, and 20 minutes later, we were finally up and running. So that is why we did that. Yeah, I didn't change even the heading and things on my website about it being live today and having switched because I was so busy. Normally, that's what I do. I normally go in, change the header on the website. We're live. Here's how you get to it. Here's how you make it work. I just had no time. I got to jump in. I'm frazzled, trying to get it. I like it to be calm when we're doing that. I like it to be very zen in here. We're doing those kinds of things. It was not zen this morning. And on top of that, of course, I was up early, as I mentioned in the show, taking my son to that event, which is fine, but it changed the cycle. You know, it's one of those things where if you're getting onto the plane, you want that pilot's day to be as boring as humanly possible. You want it to be so rote. You want it to be the normal day, like any other day, that the plane is acting like it always acts. There's nothing too crazy or out of sorts. Maybe a seat back is broken. You know, that's as bad as you would like. But as soon as something's different, that's when you have to be concerned. When there's a delay because something broke on the plane, you know, we got to have maintenance come in and look at the plane. Now I'm wondering, all right, how's this change how this guy's going to fly the plane? because now everything's thrown off. Now something is different in his day. So the poor pilots have to kind of get in that zone as well. That's why you always hear when the pilots are on, "Hi, everybody. Welcome to the flight." They have to stay there. They got to stay down here because they can't be up here. They got to be way down here. So I was not down here today. I was up here. It's not working. I knew I should have moved to that different streaming provider. I knew I should have set it up to do that. Now I'm thinking in my head, I'm going to do that as soon as I finish today. I'm moving to the other streaming provider. I don't know that I'll be doing that really, but it was one of those things where you just get into that zone where it's not really the what's happening in the back end. What's happening with all of this can sometimes create that level of concern and frustration. But we did it. We finally got together. We finally got it going. So that's where things started today. But it all went well. One of the things that I do, obviously, is there's a lot of setup for the study groups. This isn't like I can just walk in here and click a button and we're live. I've got to set up all the questions on the presentation. I've got to set up questions on Socrative and get all the answers ready to go. And then I'm running a couple of browsers on this side to make it work. That all worked great. That all was fine. I had absolutely no problem with the operation of everything today. It was just getting going, just getting started. What a challenge to get those things going. Every provider, this is kind of the situation though. Every provider is going to have a thing. If I go to another streaming provider, there's going to be a thing. There's going to be that thing that's the problem with that provider. So I may be trying some things. So if you come back to the Professor Messer, if you come to a live event anytime in the next month, you may see things a little bit differently on the screen, but I am going to be trying some different things as well. So this can be a little more interactive. There's not much of a delay. I'm doing 720p streaming right now. I want to do 1080p streaming. I've got the bandwidth for it. I'm ready to go, but I've got to get more software and hardware on my side to be able to do that. So I am working on those things. It's just a matter of getting that going. So it's just, that's my next step, is getting those pieces going. So that's where all of that came from. That's where all of those pieces came from. There we go, to make that happen. So we've come about to the end of a 2-hour session. I think my voice pretty much stayed up and running the whole time. It's almost like it's sponsored by Vocal Zone. That is who took care of that today, is keeping everything running. Andy in the chat room, just real quick before we close up everything today, asking remote viewing software is using TeamViewer now. TeamViewer is great. We were playing around with some in the chat room. I should make a list of these. I was on with, I have a provider for my, that helps with my stock photos. In my presentations, I don't take all these photos. Some of the photos I do take for these presentations, but one of the things you'll notice, for instance, for the Network Plus videos, all the videos have a theme of bridging. Bridging, another term for switching. So all of the presentations have pictures of bridges on them. And I like every presentation to have different pictures of that. So I was on a conversation I was having with them about what I want to do with that over the next year. And they said, "Well, just go out to," and they gave me a website and you can watch what I'm doing. And that was all a web-based. It seems to be a large push to more of that cloud-based, web-based, in a browser type remote access. Obviously, it's more of a one-way conversation. But boy, that really does come in handy. I use kind of commercially day-to-day, I use GoToMeeting. It's been multi-platform. It runs great. It's able to do those kinds of things I need to have two-way conversations. Anybody can present, has voice over IP integration, but not everybody needs that level of detail. And that's why, in fact, I don't use that for my study groups. We're not doing a GoToMeeting, which we could do a GoToSeminar, but I don't do that. We just put it on YouTube. We have a chat going here, and I'm happy because it's primarily a one-way conversation. You're seeing what I'm doing on my computer. But a lot of the providers out there that even GoToMeeting has got one now that is more of that connect to one computer and go back and do something quick and then disconnect. There's a website. I need to find the website that talks about all these things. Why the name is not working for me right now. Everybody now has to wait while I come up with the name of the website that I cannot remember at the moment, but I know where to find it and click through. I think I know where to find it. I'm going through to find this. I'm going through my RSS feeds. I cannot even tell you what a dumb idea that was. Like it's in my RSS feeds. I'll find it. And I'm going through, and I have right now in RSS, there are 24,000 entries that I've not read yet. But I found it, TechNibble. TechNibble is the site where people who do this kind of thing, where they're doing, you're trying to figure out, how do I remotely control? How do I get the best tools? How do I set up my shop and do those things? They have a great forum out on TechNibble. So that may be something to try, is to go out to technibble.com and see what they say. That's usually where I go to see those things as well, and find those pieces. Those do come in handy. I do get a lot of great detail from those pieces as well. So that covers it for the day. Before my voice goes completely, we're going to close up the study group and get things going for about 2 hours. I think we did pretty well today. I want to thank everybody for joining. Thanks for hanging in there. Thanks for letting me come in a little bit late today. I promise I will get a note next time so I can at least make up some credit for that. We'll see everybody next time in the study group. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.